Hi, I'm Guy Berry with Optimistic American, and today for our book club, we're going to be talking about Great by Choice by Jim Collins. In this book, it is a series of books that Jim Collins has written from Good to Great, Built to Last, Great by Choice, and we're going to discuss even how this compares to some of the other books. I hope you appreciate today's episode. And as usual, please like, comment, give us feedback, and we'll make sure to respond. And if you ask us questions, we like to try to answer those questions in the comments as well. Today on Optimistic American, we're going to be meeting with John Love from Redirect Health. John, thanks for joining us at Optimistic American today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so got to read Great by Choice, and before that we read Good to Great. What would you say compares between the two books? How do you feel they compare?
I mean, I thought they were both very complementary with each other, but could be read separately. I think the biggest things that compared for me were the principles behind them. They were both about greatness. One, Good to Great, I thought was more principled and about the action behind it. Whereas this book was more about making that choice for yourself. It was more about like personal mindset or your company's mindset, but super complementary. I really thought Good to Great was better for companies directly. Like you could take that to your board meeting or to your leadership meeting and implement steps from that book. Whereas this book was more about a mindset where, I mean, you can reflect on the choices you make and the exercises you put into practice for yourself and just decide every day, every action, every second, you can make the choice to lead a life that's great, or just if you don't make a choice, that's not what you're going to get.
Yeah, and I like what you said in there. Good to Great felt more like a company blueprint, and Great by Choice felt more like an individual mindset. That's kind of how I see it, right?
Yeah. I really saw it more as a book about philosophy, because it's really about not just how to make your company great, but one of the points he talks about is like in psychology, it's called internal locus versus external locus. And this book really focused on someone or a company taking the steps that they are in control of, like looking at what they could control in their life and setting goals based on that, versus the external locus where someone might think that outside circumstances are what's leading their lives or what's leading to their results. So for me personally, I love that you can look at what you can control, and based on measuring those outcomes, you can lead to a life that gets you to your goals.
Yeah. So let's go through the book a little bit. Great by Choice. The chapters, you've got Thriving in Uncertainty, the 10Xers, the 20-mile march, Fire Bullets, then Cannonballs, Leading Above the Death Line, Smack, Return on Luck. Those are the main chapters. There's also epilogue and some other ones, but let's go through them. So let's start with Thriving in Uncertainty. Really is the introduction of this book, and what I took away from it is originally when I was going to this book, I don't know about you, but I felt it talks about in a time of uncertainty, and I'm thinking, great, this book's going to be perfect for a recession. And he actually points out this book isn't necessarily for that. It's not for huge things like a recession or environment changes or just, catastrophes. This is more about, hey, day to day, things are unpredictable. How do you produce forward? I don't know. Is that how you felt reading this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot about consistency. Like if there's a boom time, that's the time to build up your reserves, get ready for those events that are not predictable. I think there's a quote that says something like, you can't predict the future, but you can create it. And in those moments where things are going really well, it's the time to prepare for when they might not be so good. Because if you are prepared, then you can capitalize on those moments.
Mm-hmm. And as he goes and introduces 10Xers, he gives a diagram, and I've got it somewhere in my notes here. All right. So the three concepts here: the fanatic discipline, empirical creativity, and productive paranoia. And when he introduces those concepts, the chapters then follow those concepts, right? So the 20-mile march is about that fanatic discipline, and productive paranoia is more so, as he's looking at, which one was productive paranoia? It was more so in the leading above the death line. And then the empirical creativity is that fire bullets, then cannonballs. So he describes the chapters with different names, but it's still keeping to some of those same concepts. And then he talks about the level 5 ambition being in the middle of that diagram. Now, 10X, I've heard that term a lot in the entrepreneurial community. 10Xers, I wonder if that maybe is where this started. I don't know. Have you heard 10Xer outside of this book? Is it more recent readings? I'm trying to decide, like, is this potentially where 10X came from? I don't know.
I've heard it in multiple contexts. I've heard it from Grant Cardone. His whole thing is 10X. He's got a book called 10X, I think. But it's sort of a mentality that a lot of people adopt. I think I've heard it from Strategic Coach, Dan Sullivan. And I think his podcast might be called something with 10X in it. I've seen it in his books. I've heard our founder at Redirect Health, David Berg, talk about it. I think he got it from Dan Sullivan also. So I've seen it in so many contexts, but I think it's really about sometimes thinking about how to get a 10X outcome is easier than a 2X outcome. It's really about that creativity to think outside the box so that when you have a goal that you're trying to accomplish, you can accomplish it by thinking outside of the box and just you don't want to constrain yourself with false constraints that hold you back. Like, you really want to think uniquely to get to that goal.
Yeah. The level 5 ambition, he says, this is where 10Xers channel their energy into something larger and more enduring than themselves. So we get into from the 10Xer and introducing these main concepts. He then goes through these chapters describing some of it, starting with the 20-mile march. And the title of this chapter comes from the example of somebody marching to the South Pole?
Yeah.
And he picks 20 miles every day versus somebody which means if the conditions are really bad, you get your 20 miles. The conditions are really good, you get your 20 miles. Not looking at it as, hey, the conditions are bad, let's not move today. The conditions are really great, let's try to do 40 miles today. No, just consistently do the 20 miles no matter what. And a lot of organizations, I would say, I can feel at times where conditions are good, so they act one way. Conditions are bad, they act another way, versus that consistency. I don't know. What have you seen around that concept?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a lot about the prep work first. Some of the other things that I think his name was Arminson versus Robert Scott. Yeah, they were going to the South Pole and coming back. And some of the major highlights were that Arminson, if he thought he needed 10 weeks of supplies, he'd bring 15 weeks worth of supplies. If he thought 20 miles was going to take 5 hours, he'd plan for 7 hours. He'd always plan for more, just to have that buffer. Whereas Robert Scott, if he thought it was going to take 10 weeks worth of supplies, he would take 10 weeks exactly, and he would just count on basically nothing going wrong and the ability to stick to his plan. And where that resulted was, I mean, Arminson reached the South Pole about 34 days before he did. And Robert Scott, a lot of the time he was thinking about, I wonder if Arminson has already passed me. I wonder where he's at. I wonder how he's doing. Whereas Arminson was just focused on the plan. 20 miles today, 20 miles tomorrow. Doesn't matter if the weather's great and I feel like I could do 60, or if the weather was really rough and maybe they should stay in. He'd hit those 20 miles every day. But I think the central idea is there is just having a recipe, having like the principles that you stick to, and then just having the discipline, fanatic discipline, to stick to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier said than done, because I think in any company or just even in life, it's when things are going easy or well or whatever, we just our emotions tend to go one way versus how we react when things aren't going our way, right? And so it's even having, and when he uses the term fanatic discipline, he means it. You got to have that fanatic discipline to say things are going great. Like, how many times in our own life do we see people who have a lot of money in their savings account? So what do they go do? Buy a new car, buy, new house, something, right? That I have the money, so it's like burning a hole in my bank account. Let me go do something with it. Versus fanatic discipline would be like, what's your plan? What's your strategy? And have it. I even have that same thing with myself where I'm like, oh, do I go, like, what do we do now? Do we go get a different house? But what's the plan? What are you doing to create your, reach those goals you want in life? So I think fanatic discipline is not just about a company. It's how can you even do that for yourself? Because when things are going bad, it's real easy. Like if I'm down or whatever, maybe I don't exercise, right? Maybe I don't, stick to a diet because I'm having a bad day or whatever. But having discipline would say, no, I can have a bad day and I'm still going to exercise. I'm still going to do the other things because these are all the steps to keep moving forward.
Yeah, it keeps you on track. But what he also highlighted was that it's nonconformist. Like it's not going to matter where maybe you do something and your peers or your boss or someone else thinks that maybe that's not the thing to do. Maybe it's an unpopular move. But if that's what your plan designates, then that's what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So after he goes through the 20-mile march, he moves into the next chapter, which is Fire Bullets Than Cannonballs. And what I love about this chapter is I felt this chapter, especially with our organization, being very innovative. There's at times we might test or try a lot of different things, and that can be very hard at times because people want to. I see a battle at times where people in an organization want things to be the perfect thing. Hey, no, let's plan, let's organize, let's create this perfect process. Let's create this perfect strategy. Let's create this perfect next move or perfect product. And the challenge I see with that is you could put all these resources into it and invest all this time and then find out that wasn't the right thing to invest in. So now we go back and go, no, let's fire bullets. Let's try a lot of little things and find the one that really strikes, then fire cannonballs at the one that strikes. I love this concept, but I'd love to hear what you thought going through it.
Yeah, I mean, what I took away was that the overall concept was that the 10X companies versus the comparison companies, they were just about as innovative. They were the same amount of innovative. I think maybe the 10X companies were a little bit less. But what they did really well, which I thought connected with the first chapter on discipline, was they went and experimented, took small little experiments, low cost, low distraction, which I thought was very important. And they tried new things to see what could work. And then once they found something that did work, then they started investing heavily, putting more time, more money into it. But ultimately, I was impressed that the 10X companies were not more innovative. It was just about being disciplined with your experimenting and then, like in baseball, really hitting hard when you saw a good pitch. Like they don't have a higher batting average. They just have a really good batting average when the pitch is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was a key part of it is that the comparison companies in this book were actually just as innovative. So you can't say, oh, innovation creates this greatness or has an impact. No, it's not about innovation itself. It's about how did they get to the innovation and how did they really test lots of different opportunities. It's in a way, I look at it as if I were to go look at my own self, right, and talk about networking. So if you go out and network, people talk about networking all the time in business or just in life or leadership. If I have 200 people that I network with versus 1,000, I'm likely to, if I go out and meet and shake hands with 1,000 people, I might have a more impactful relationship somewhere in there that I develop or create versus out of the 200, right? So I look at that as away firing bullets versus cannonballs, even in that aspect. It might be it's going to be a lot harder to go shake 1,000 hands and meet 1,000 people versus 200, but there's a greater chance of upside there.
Yeah, I can see that. And to mix in another concept from good to great, the flywheel, what I was thinking about as I read this chapter was, if you're a company that maybe invests too heavily in some opportunities you haven't fully researched, they spent a lot of money and time, a lot of resources on those experiments, which in turn led to them having less cash buffer, less cash reserves. They just had less runway once a recession or once some bad luck hit the companies. Whereas if you were disciplined with your experimenting and didn't invest too heavily right away, that would lead to you finding a good opportunity, investing heavily in it, making a lot of money off of it, which added to your reserve, which then added to your ability to experiment even more and keep finding positive opportunities. So I could really see the positive and the negative flywheel in both of those instances.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so now we move from firing bullets and cannonballs, and we go into leading above the death line. And this chapter, again, now this, we've covered with firing bullets and cannonballs. That one really covered empirical creativity. Fanatic discipline was covered in the 20-mile march. Now leading above the death line is about the productive paranoia. And he uses an example that I really enjoyed about a cameraman who is climbing, and in this aspect, he has to get the perfect shot at the top of this mountain. And he talks about all the planning, his binder that he has in preparation, all the other things he does to ensure that he gets this perfect shot when he gets up, and all the things that he thought through, like the scenarios that he thought through, to even making sure that he knew how to take the camera out, prepare it, do all the things in freezing temperature with gloves on. I mean, just the amount of detail. People would go, "This guy's crazy. Why are you going through all this?" Just to get a picture at the top. But because of that, he was able, to succeed in what he was trying to do. So there's that level of paranoia, right, that you have to think through. And so with companies, we're talking about bank accounts, having enough money that for the hard times, other things, that you've got that paranoia that, hey, something could happen tomorrow. Let's make sure we have that buffer. So what did you get out of this chapter of leading above the death line?
Yeah, I thought this chapter was about staying alive. And in that example you were talking about with David Brashear, that was literally the difference for him, staying alive versus not. I think he on one day decided to go back down the mountain because maybe he was worried about the weather conditions, and he saw a lot of people going up Mount Everest that day, and he was afraid if there was bad weather and there was a lot of people, he'd get caught up at the top of the mountain when it was cold. And again, with being nonconformist, he saw two experts that did it all the time, climbed Everest all the time. He saw them going up, and he still decided to go back down that day. And the way that story ended was 8 people died that day at the top of the mountain. And he was at the bottom in his tent with his supplies, with his whole team. He saved his whole team. And not only that, he brought so many supplies that he was able to donate some of his oxygen canisters and other supplies to help the rescue efforts once the weather did turn bad. But yeah, this chapter was all about risk, all about staying alive. Another type of risk was the asymmetric risk, whereas if you have good luck, it's not going to make your company great. There's no one single instance of good luck that's going to just make you great and keep you there. But if you have one instance of bad luck, depending on what it is, it could kill your company, and then you're no longer around to get good opportunities. You're done. The game's over. So I thought this chapter was just about staying alive. And if you can do that, you can experiment. If you can experiment, you can find good opportunities. If you find those, you can capitalize on them, and just keep playing the game.
Yeah. We move on now to a concept that he introduces, the SMAC, S-M-A-C. And this is specific, methodical, and consistent. Now, for SMAC, he calls a company having a SMAC recipe. And in the book, he used an example where he calls Southwest Airlines, this would be their smack recipe. Now, again, you got to remember this book is written early 2000s. And so some of these companies they use in examples, at times those companies maybe not be in the height of their organizations or height of their industry, if you will, now. But in this example, he's using Southwest smack recipe, which is the passenger is our number one product. Do not carry air freight or mail, only small packages, which have high profitability and low handling costs. Stay out of food services. Utilize the 737 as our primary aircraft. Remain a short-haul carrier under 2-hour segments. So if you looked at this smack recipe, I mean, the 737 still is their smack recipe. And, do not carry air freight or mail. I don't believe they've started that. And then being the passengers our number one product, I think those have all stayed. 2-hour, I believe they've gotten a little bit past their 2-hour segment, and they obviously have food.
The other one was quick turnarounds.
And quick turnarounds, right?
Yeah,
and so
get in, get out.
Yep, that's right. And so what's great about a smack recipe is it can be changed, right? So offering food, they can change some of it, but it takes a lot of effort to change it. Can't be something that can be changed overnight. This is our bread and butter. So I'd be curious what you got out of the chapter in the book around the smack.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can change overnight. His point was it shouldn't.
That's true.
What he found between the 10X companies and the comparison companies was exactly that. The comparison companies that weren't great, they changed it 4 times more,
right.
About 60% of the time. Whereas the 10X companies only changed it about 15% of the time. They rarely changed it. And if they did, it was with great effort.
Yeah.
I loved his example on, for the smack recipe, he used the U.S. Constitution and our amendment process. But basically, we got a document that's been the same for 225 years or so.
Yep.
And to change it, it's going to take 2/3 majority vote.
That's exactly right. And that is the perfect example of just saying, look, this is specific, methodical, and consistent, right? I think that too many times we put these types of scenarios, so a smack recipe as the United States Constitution, a company, their foundational values. But what is our own personal smack recipe on how we're going to grow as people or do anything? I don't know if did you have any reflections? And because if you didn't, I'm going to tell you, I would love to know what your smack recipe is as an individual. But I don't know, what thoughts have you had on that as an individual?
That's a great question. I mean, what I think about is, for me personally, I think about it in categories. I think it's super important to be healthy. Like, you got to be alive to play the game. I think about it in terms of wealth and then also happiness. And then within each category, I kind of think about what metrics do I want to achieve. So for health, I want to be alive, but not just alive. I want to have vitality, wake up, tip dancing, tiptoeing rather. And I want to be able to run or work out or do whatever it is that I want to do without, feeling aches or pains, or just really have a long health span. For wealth, again, it's kind of, I want to be able to have enough money to do the things that I want to do. I don't want to have to work or trade my time for money. And I'm not there yet, but that's one of the things I'm working towards. And I think there are principles in place. Like, for me, the biggest one is constant and never-ending improvement. I'm just always trying to improve a little bit every day, keep reading books like this, keep working out, getting more miles in. And also for the happiness piece, it's about being social, going, seeing your family, seeing your friends, seeing those top 5, top 10 people frequently and staying in contact. Those are the top things I look at in my life.
That's good.
What about you?
Yeah, I would say that if I were to look at, if you were, what's interesting is my smack, something that shouldn't change, right? If I were to look in the past, I had a much different smack than I do today. And that fundamental shift would be that my previous smack was more related to what am I doing specifically for the collective around me, family, friends, people, could be the organization I'm with, whatever. But it was always around what am I doing for everyone else, and less about what am I doing for myself. And more originally, or today, it's more about what am I doing for myself, knowing that if I do not take care of myself, I can't do anything for anybody else. And so a big part of my own health, mentally, physically, all that has to be taken care of so that I can take care of those around me, but also be present for them. I want to be present for everybody else. I don't want to, have an early death because I didn't do something to just take care of myself. But also, I'm not going to be here forever. So making sure that I'm teaching those around me is extremely important, because there's a lot of things out of our control that can happen to us, and then mental is really my biggest focus right now. If I were to say smack recipe, it's got to be what am I doing mentally? When I think of the mind, it's not something we talk about a lot, but yet it is a crucial part to our future, meaning understanding how it's going to work in with the world of technology around us, and what is technology having as an influence on our mind. I think that what I do is I focus on, okay, things are going to happen to me, but it's not about, if you think like things that happen to you creates your emotions, it's really about what am I going to do to choose how I react to those things around me, because things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And so those concepts are more what I'm focused on today. I'd say the mind is a big one. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I like how, going back to your example about Southwest versus PSA, Pacific Southwest Airlines, his major example here was that the Southwest basically copied PSA. They literally went to their headquarters and learned from their operating manuals and adopted their philosophies to create Southwest, just because they admired the company so much. So these two companies both had the exact same recipe, to begin with. And then to your point about external things getting in the way, PSA let that happen. They saw bright, shiny objects, or they saw recessions, or they saw things that changed the recipe, whereas Southwest stuck to the same thing over and over and over, the same recipe. And I mean, look where they are today. I think as they were going toward their 20-mile march, I think they succeeded 19 out of 20 years in a row during that time. Whereas PSA, I mean, we don't know who they are anymore. I think they were acquired by someone else and got rolled up into another company.
Yeah, and I think I love they even let people ride on their planes to learn about their business. It was great. Okay, so then we go to Return on Luck to close out the book. And when it comes to returning on luck, it's not, they're going into the book as they were doing their studying. Jim Collins and Morton and Hansen talked about, they looked at the theory that these companies had to have more luck, companies that were great and that did really well, they just must have more luck. And what they learned is it wasn't about them having more luck. In fact, some of the other companies, comparison companies that were not 10x companies, had just as much luck, if not more luck than those. It was what they did with the luck. So when they had luck, how did they capitalize on it? But also when they had bad luck, how did they handle it, right? So it's not just return on good luck. It's how do you create return on the bad luck as well. But what concepts or how did you feel as you read through that book or that chapter? Yeah,
what was highlighted for me is the 10x companies, they never blamed bad luck for failures or for bad circumstances. They just saw it as something to learn from. They were really good at learning from their mistakes. And they owned it. When there was a failure, they owned it. They looked at it like, how can I get better from this? AKA, how can I next time get a better return on the bad luck? And at the same time, when the 10x companies had good luck, they didn't let it get to their head. They didn't think, oh, I'm so good that even if something bad happens, I can overcome it.
Yep.
Because that would have led to perhaps they would overestimate themselves the next time and overextend themselves and then run into some bad luck that would take their company down. So the good luck, they just kind of looked the other way, like, hey, we had some good luck. That's all right. It happens. But I just loved how in the times when there was bad luck, they looked inwardly. They looked at how they could improve, and that ultimately led them to capitalize on the next good luck or bad luck that happened.
Yeah, and he uses the example that you could say Bill Gates had good luck because of the time he was at and what was going on in that, that he had things put in front of him, right? That just made it so easy. And it's like, no, there was a lot of people that could have capitalized on the same luck that he was having, right?
Yeah.
He made the choice to leave school and go do something, while other people said, I'm going to finish school and then maybe I'll focus on some of this computer stuff that's happening. So you got to capitalize on that luck too. Any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to add about Great by Choice?
Again, I just thought it was more of a book about philosophy than it was about companies. Really about internal versus external control. And if you think there's an external locus of control and you don't have control of your circumstances, there's not really much you can do with that, even if it's true. But if you have an internal locus, you can learn from anything good or bad that happens, and you can just keep improving your life one day at a time. So I love the philosophy aspect behind the book.
Yeah. So the burning question, good to great or great by choice?
I got to say good to great. It's just such a classic. And I love that he took the book and when it was new and went to Amazon and literally taught.
Good to great.
Yeah. Tim Collins went to Amazon and taught the concepts of good to great to that early Amazon leadership team, and they took it and ran with it. And look where they are today. Yeah,
definitely the books stand alone on themselves, meaning I think you can read either one without reading the other one first, and you'd be fine. You could start with Great by Choice or start with Good to Great. I agree, Good to Great's the foundation, right? And they're using some of that same research they did for Good to Great in this, but they're looking at it through a different lens. So I agree with you. I feel like Good to Great is the stable, but definitely Great by Choice. I would recommend reading both. I wouldn't just stop at one. I think they both have concepts in it. And I also view that when you read a book that you're going to get something out of the book depending on what's going on around you. You ever feel that way? If I were to read, I read Good to Great almost 20 years ago, and then I read it again recently, totally different concepts
100%,
stuck with me.
100%.
So it's also dependent about what's going on in your external environment that I think is what you'll pull out of a book. But yeah, I'd say read them both. Would you say read them both?
Yeah, completely. Read them both. They should both be in your library.
Yeah.
They both have a lot to learn from. And then, like you said, even rereading them every few years or every 5 years, because you've learned things, you're going to see them differently, and you're going to be able to take away and act differently in that time.
It's true. Well, John, thank you for joining today on Optimistic American. For those listening and or watching our video, thank you for hearing our book club today on Great by Choice with Jim Collins. Our next book we'll be reading with the Optimistic American is called The Goal. And we will go into that next month. Like and subscribe to our newsletter. Please give us comments, and thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned. We can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.